Welcome everyone to the show, Combustible Elements, real talk for real people. Here we try to put different ideas and perspectives together in a pot, heat it up, and get an explosion of knowledge and understanding. We understand that problems can only be fixed starting from the bottom to the top, building a great foundation for change and improvement. I'm Big Mel, and I'm joined by Ruben, aka the Monarch, and Aaron, the Hitman. Let's get
Yeah.
started. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're back again. I want to thank you for joining us for Combustible Elements. As always, I'm Big Mel. I'm joined by Aaron the Hitman and Ruben the Monarch. And we have a special guest today. So I'm going to let my guest introduce himself, and then I'm going to tell you the topic because it's a topic that we need to talk about because it's a lot of misconceptions with this topic. So, Michael, please introduce yourself to everybody.
Hey, everybody. Mike Ulrich. You can call me Big Mike, Big Guy, whatever you feel comfortable with. I've known Mel for a while now. He's been a training partner of mine for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, as well as Aaron. We trained at a number of gyms together. Know these guys, great gentlemen. Excited to be a part of the conversation tonight.
Thank you for joining us once again, Big Mike.
Welcome.
Okay, today I'm not Big Mel. I'm just Mel today because the real big man's in the studio. So I mean on Zoom. I can't say in the studio, but the real big man is here.
You
So
still
I'm just Mel today. Well, I'm Big Mel to you. Um, so today's topic, we're going to talk about the illusion of white privilege because people just think because people are white that they have an advantage over other people, and that's not so. You know, some people are privileged, and then some people aren't privileged. And you got to really like tell the difference because yes, there's a history of white privilege in this country, and our society was based on that in the 18th and 19th century when capitalism was a major thing. And there is some privilege that still goes on today because these laws were enacted to support white privilege. So, once again, if I sound winded, COVID is real, it's still out there, wear your mask. And I'm going to give you a little facts, and then we're going to run with it. So, there are two instances where race came into play in the history of the world. The first one was during the Crusades when the church and the Muslims were fighting for Jerusalem, and then you had the Jews there. So they had to come up with a way to separate different groups. So race became an issue then. Before that, we were all human beings. Now, you may have been from this area or that area. We may have thought we were better than you because we conquered you. We had a war with you, or we just, the hometown team. But it was already consistent that you may look different, but we're human beings. So that's the first instance. The second instance was during the British and Irish Wars. So Britain had to justify the subjugation of Ireland, and they put out the propaganda machine. This was also a time when they started propaganda big time, and they connected it with religion, of course. Whereas though they put the idea forth of they're savages, we're better than them, we should conquer them to make their life better. So those two instances was when race became a portion of everything, and where they separated those two groups. Now, as we know, the British really populated the United States. And when they got here, they had indentured servitude. So when you're talking indentured servitude, you're talking about Europeans. You're talking about Irish, um, German, Italian, and several other groups. Now, because of their relationship with the rest of the world, their portion of the world, they couldn't make them permanent slaves. They made them partial slaves. You served us for a couple years, and then you were free. Usually it was around 5 years. The Native Americans, when they decided which groups that they were going to do certain things to, the Native Americans were indigenous to the land, and you couldn't really subjugate them because they knew the land. They could slip away, and you could never find them. And then they started slavery with the Africans, And so they separated the groups because the Africans, they grabbed them, they were free, they could keep them. When I say free, I mean financially free, not free. Um, and you can find them because they were so different than all the other races that were over there. And I hate using the word racist, but that's the word they use. And they ran with the idea that they were making the lives of these people better because of they were savages, they were better. And then race became a major, major, major factor. It dictated everything. And it dictated the laws for this country because they all go back to like the British conquest. Most of the people that were in charge were British. Um, on that note, that's your little history lesson before we jump into it. And then I have a few questions for Michael because that's what I do, Mike. I ask questions to everybody and I never answer one. So, for your question, how do you feel when people sit down there and they say white privilege, white privilege, compared to your history, what you had to do, and throw your history in it, what you had to do to get to where you're at today?
Mm-hmm. It's tough, like with any group, regardless of color. When you try to put an organization or a group into a box and claim that there's some existence of this privilege, it's hard to say that. Okay, what does white mean? It's like saying, what does black mean? What is Hispanic? What is that? What do they mean? Because there's a lot of difference and differentiation within those groups. It's not a monolith. With white privilege, it's a touchy and tender subject now because it's gotten so much attention in the media. So it's difficult to try to articulate what that is. But from my perspective, I have a difficulty identifying various areas where there are privilege in relation to, I guess my story should probably articulate that best. So I'm the son of a man who was the son of a man who had 9 kids. My grandfather had 9 children, worked 2 jobs his whole life to provide for his children, to put a roof over their heads, to provide them some educational opportunities. Nothing was granted to them, no additional privileges in terms of educational opportunities or money was granted to them. They had us. My father worked 2 jobs, 3 jobs since I was a kid, was a small business owner, had experienced failures with that, did that all on his own. When it was our time to step up and go through our lives, as we started through school and started through our own educational paths, there was no opportunity for us to get scholarships or anything like that. We had to figure out ways to pay for our own education. My father just the guy was working, just to give you an example, I mean, he was doing paper delivery in the morning to make a couple bucks to help pay for textbooks and stuff like that for us. He would go work his regular 9-to-5 job and then go deliver pizzas at night and on the weekends. He just, I mean, I still feel like I'm in his shadow in so many ways as far as a provider for a family. But you think of those ideas and then somebody tells you, oh, you have privilege, you get everything. The way it sounds, at least when it's portrayed, is that everything's handed to you. You have an easy road to success. And I don't think that's true for anybody. I don't think that's the case. There's no clear and cut path to opportunity, success, riches, wealth, any number of those things. So for me, it's difficult to say that there's this privilege that applies only to what I don't know what that means, because if I look at an historical context, was there privilege applied to my great grandfather who came over from Italy, couldn't speak a lick of English, and was constantly rejected from jobs because he was an Italian. They didn't want Europeans working in different areas. Same thing with the Irish when they came over. And these are typical groups that are classified as white, but they don't identify themselves as I'm not a white, I'm an Irish American or I'm an Italian American. Those groups, you used to see signs for no Irish need apply. So I look at those examples in context, and I think you need to look at the historical precedents that's set with these groups and understand where does the privilege apply there. And that's where I'm looking at it from, is that there's not, it's not a singular group, it's individuals, it's different sects of those groups that make up what people are defining as one population that has this one overarching privilege and one overarching life benefit. And I don't see that being the case. I think every individual has certain levels of privilege to each their own. There's certain opportunities available to Chinese Americans or Latino Americans that aren't available to white Americans or what would classify as white Americans. So it's all situational. And the difficulty of that concept becomes is everybody's looking at it tribalistically, where you're getting put into a bucket. This is the black group, this is the Hispanic group, this is the white group, and you're getting all of these things applied to you, when if you look at it from an individual context, not everybody carries a privilege or is receiving any type of privilege. They're struggling just like the person next to them. White guy struggling next to a black guy struggling next to a Hispanic guy. There's not, or woman. There's not any. It's tough. It's really tough to say, because you get it kind of beat over your head as a white guy, that you have a privilege, and I don't know. It's not necessarily the way I feel. I think there's certain privileges to certain groups, but it's a very individualized thing as far as where you come from and your upbringing, your experience. And I believe if we break it down a little bit further into the context of each individual and their road, it becomes a very different conversation.
Okay, I'm going to let because I can do this all day. I'm going to let Aaron or Ruben chime in. Do you have anything you want to throw into, guys?
I'll jump in real quick. So I know a lot of people do throw around like white privilege and things like that. So I base a lot of my understanding off of how things go through life experience. Like if I understand other people have different experience, or me and somebody else might have the same experience, but we perceive it differently. So I've never experienced, for instance, like I've never experienced racism before. The way other people say people are racist towards them, I've never experienced direct racism. I've experienced like invert, like when people don't like you and you understand that they don't like you, but I don't really perceive that as necessarily racism, because Black people or African American people or even African people may give me the same vibe or give me the same looks and things like that. So to my point, like I've never experienced white privilege. It's been talked about, and they say like it's easier for Caucasians to get loans or to open businesses. But like Mike was saying, his dad had a regular job, had his own small business, had jobs on the side. My dad has a carpet job, and he also delivered pizza, and we also work at the newspaper company. So my dad had, and he does home health care. So my dad has like 4 jobs, and he's grinding, and as well as Mike dad did. So for them to say, so from the outside looking in, my dad and his dad had the same opportunities. They both had small businesses, and they both opted to have jobs on the side to take care of their families. So in some instances, as the news may portray, it is white privilege out there, and there are opportunities that are afforded to people who are non-Americans, which we had conversations about before. Mel and Ruben, we had conversations about before, non-Americans having opportunities that Americans don't have. So is that privilege that's given to just Caucasian people, or is it just people that's not from this country? Because it's Caucasian people in the country, and is Asians and is Hispanics that get the same opportunities that we get, or anybody gets. And sometimes if they capitalize over the opportunities and they help build generational wealth, then we look down on them because they're building generational wealth, and we're like, well, they have privilege. But if we were to build generational wealth the way that they were doing, then everybody would look at us like we're privileged. People may look at Ruben like, Ruben got it going on. Ruben, it has privilege because he's not just American. He's from Haiti. So now he's looked down upon because he has a business and he's doing good for himself, and he grinding for his family. And now we look at him side eye, and now all of a sudden Ruben has privileges. So now everybody that's doing good or better than us has a certain type of privilege that we have to single out and bring attention to. And I just feel like that, again, my personal experience, I've never experienced, somebody having a privilege over top of me, for me to say that white people or Caucasian people have a certain type of privilege. It is spoken of, but again, I've never experienced it before.
Ruben?
All right. So one thing I will say, when I think of privilege, and I want to go with the definition, the actual definition that I got right here is a special advantage, immunity, permission, right, or benefit granted or enjoyed by an individual, class, or caste. So right now we're talking about whether or not white privilege exists. I believe it does, and privilege exists for different class of people. But one of the things I've realized when it comes to privilege itself is people who live in privilege. Part of being privileged is you don't realize it. It's kind of like, air exists. You're breathing air. That's oxygen exists, but you don't see it because you now once you remove oxygen somewhere you can't breathe. Now you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why can't I breathe? I feel like that's the same thing. That's the same thing when it comes to privilege. If you living in it, if you surrounded by it, if that's all you know, you don't realize or recognize it until it gets taken away, or until you somebody makes you aware of the absence of it. Is it true that you can have an upbringing and you that's similar to somebody somebody that's white can have a similar upbringing to somebody that's black, and they go through the same struggle, and both people might be feeling like, okay, you know what, we're going through the same thing, so there's no privilege there? That can very well be the case, but from my experience and me not growing up here gives me an outside view of all of this. I was born in Haiti. I grew up until I was born and raised until I was 12, and I didn't come here until I was about 12, turning 13. So I got it. I got it. I can see both sides. Where Mike says, okay, you know what, my dad, my grandfather had 9 kids. My dad struggled. My dad had a business. He worked 3 jobs to provide for his family. And you, Aaron, saying the same thing about your father. But what I can say to both of you is privilege still does exist. Like, my kids are privileged. Reason why they're privileged, because the way everything I'm doing to put them in a position where they don't even understand that they're privileged. That's the benefit of them being privileged. Like my youngest son being the most privileged one out of all of them, because the neighborhood that he's gonna grow up in, the type of house that he's gonna grow up in, the surrounding that he's gonna have, that's his regular everyday life, but that's not everybody's everyday life. And the reason why is because I'm busting my behind to make sure that he has a way easier path than not just me, but also his siblings. Now, is it fair? Maybe not, but privilege exists. And to an extent, it's like that's the reason why capitalism exists. You know what I mean? So you can give your kids, so you can give your heir, the privilege to do other things that you yourself may not have been able to do at a certain point or at a certain age. Because otherwise, we would just be living equally, and even though that sounds like a good idea and it sounds like a good concept, I'm not working as hard as I am just to be equal to everybody else. That doesn't mean I'm better, but it's more so like, if I'm doing all the work that I'm doing, then I want to be ahead. And if I'm ahead, then I want to make sure my kids keep that lead. That's the whole point of like, I have a lot of customers that I speak to, and a lot of times when we start having this conversation when it comes to privilege, some of the stuff that I mentioned to them, they don't even think about that, and a lot of them are college kids, and the reason why they're not thinking about it is like I just told you. Whereas if you're growing up in something, you're not aware of it. You're not made aware of it until either you find yourself out of that situation, and then you could look at it from the outside looking in, or somebody really, like, something happened that shocks you out of your what your norm is, what you're used to, what you constantly deal with, and then you're like, yo, you know what? I didn't even realize what was going on. Like this is all I knew. This is like, why would you think that? Why would you realize that you had a leg up? Why would you think, everybody doesn't live this way? That's how you live. That's how your neighbors live. That's how everybody around you live. So I don't know. That's just my view on it so far.
So can I say something? Because man, I know you're about to say.
I got something to say after you
I
say
seen
something.
you writing. I seen you writing, so it's about to be some questions thrown out there. But so that's I wasn't saying privilege doesn't exist. It exists, and everybody has that opportunity to be privileged, just like you are affording that to your kids, and they're going to grow up being privileged because of you grinding. Now, if your kids grow up and they're privileged and they don't understand that they're privileged, it's not fair to them for people to turn around and look at them like, oh, it's because they're Haitian that they're privileged. No, it's because you was grinding to give them that opportunity to grow up privileged. And then they will move the way that you move, and then that will benefit their kids and hopefully their kids' kids. And that's building generational wealth. That's building a wealth mindset in your kids. And again, they'll move the way that you move, and they don't understand that they're moving in privilege because that's the way that you brought them up. But to say that is only a white privilege or a black privilege or a Haitian privilege, no, people are privileged. That is a fact. But it's the way that the person before the generation before them helps bring them up. And again, that builds generational wealth, that builds generational privilege.
Generational knowledge.
Exactly. So okay, it is white privilege, but it's also privilege across the board, depending on how you raise your kids and the knowledge that you give them and the understanding that they have, that you give them the example preceding, for them to come up in.
Now, I have one problem with everything that you just said. You made me cross something off my list.
Hey,
So
that's
you finally did it.
You talk
to
too
the
much.
punch. I got to cross something off my. Yeah, I do talk too much. But I do want to. I did have a second thing on my list, and I guess it goes along with privilege. And this is what I remind people a lot. You've heard me say it. Mike heard me say it, and I'm sure Ruben's heard me say it when we were talking. And he was talking about how he doesn't think he's better than anybody else. I personally feel like people should think they better than certain people. Like we are the same physically. We all start as an embryo or whatever, XY chromosome. And you have the potential to do whatever you need to do. However, some people take those opportunities. Some people don't take those opportunities. We are all not the same. And it's going to be a sign to some people that you're privileged because people don't know the story. They don't know how hard you work to get to that position. Or they're going to look at you and be like, well, you must have had an advantage. You have a nice house, you have a nice car, you have a nice home, whatever, a nice job. And people don't know the backstory. They don't know what you went through to get to that point. So privilege should not be a bad word. When you assign this white, black, and race and all that to it, it makes it a bad word. But because you privileged, you work for that privilege. So that privilege is yours because you earned it. So if you earned it, can it really be called a privilege? Um, that's all I'm going to say on that. And yes, I do have another question.
Because
Unless I hear Rude talking, go ahead. Let me hear it.
It can still be called a privilege because it's an advantage. A privilege is it just means it's an advantage. It's an edge. I mean, you talking about like you guys do mixed martial arts. I used to do I used to do jujitsu. I haven't done it in years now. But if you're a fighter, you're looking for an edge. So privilege, all it is an edge. Like if everybody, again, me saying I don't think I'm better than everybody, that doesn't mean doesn't mean I think any lower of myself. I think I'm that bull. I think I'm great. Listen, my confidence is something that doesn't lack, and I instill that in all my kids. I tell them they're beautiful. I tell them they're awesome. I tell them they're great. I tell my boys they're handsome. So I'm fueling them daily. I'm gassing them all the way up because my father made sure he gassed me up. Now, because I feel I'm as gassed up as I am, I feel like I'm awesome. Now, if anybody else doesn't feel the same way, that's not my fault. Me feeling like me saying I'm not better. That doesn't mean I don't feel like I'm great. I'm saying I'm not better, and it's like I'm not saying I'm equal. I'm more, let's say, I think I'm great. So now, by me thinking I'm great, I'm going for the best. I'm going for all the top notch that I can reach. I'm looking for whatever edge, because who's to tell me that whoever else I'm going against, they didn't have that same upbringing, or they didn't have that same mindset. My thinking is, if I think I'm the way I am, everybody thinks that way. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So because that's not the case, I'm going 150%, because I'm thinking, yo, if I'm not working this hard, whoever else is around, they're gonna work. They're gonna outwork me, and I'm not gonna be able to get to where I'm trying to get to. That doesn't mean I'm competing necessarily with them, but I'm just trying to make sure I'm doing the best that I can do to get to where I'm trying to get to. So I'm looking for that edge, and in me finding my edge, I'm making sure that when I get my edge, I'm passing it down. I'm bringing it on to my kids. I'm bringing it on to my family. So I'm elevating myself. I'm not necessarily putting anybody else down in order to elevate myself. I'm just going as hard as I can.
Now, I didn't say putting
No. I'm not
else
saying
down,
you did,
but I'm saying that people should know that they better than other people. You are not the same as somebody that didn't take the advantages that they had, somebody that was robbing purses or whatever. Like, you chose to be who you are, and you made yourself who you are, and you should be able to pat yourself on the back for that. Now, Michael, what do you think about these comments? Because we've been rambling on. We didn't forget about you. We know you did.
No. I've been writing some notes down as we've been going. And I guess I'm taking a page out of your book. So I keep finding myself writing whether or not privilege is equal to opportunity, and if privilege is the right word to use, because a lot of us are saying the same thing. If you notice, we're saying a lot of the same thing. And my father was exactly the same way. You are great. You have greatness within you. You need to push yourself. You always need to be finding your next level. Don't ever be lazy. All of those concepts were instilled in me, just like it sounds like they were instilled in you, and you're passing that generationally forward. That in and of itself is a generational wealth. So to say that that's a privilege, I don't believe it is. I believe it's an upbringing. I believe it's a mindset. I believe it's a responsibility to push that into, regardless of color, you push that into your kids because you want them to be great. You want to set the right foundation. I just think that's just a natural inclination for everybody. So I keep looking at the word privilege. I circled a few times. Is it the right word, and are we talking about it in the right context? Because how does this apply, and is privilege? And I'll throw this question out there. It might be an odd one to ask, but is privilege an out for people that aren't willing to step up and do those hard things and do those things to pull themselves up and take advantage of those opportunities? Is that out for the people that are in the group going, well, I'm not as good as that well, they have privilege, so they got that way because they have privilege? Or is it because you didn't work as hard as you could have worked, and you're saying that to try and equalize the playing field or put them on the same level as you, when in reality they're not? They've taken advantage of opportunities. But and I say that with a caveat, because I think there needs to be a component to those that are aware that there's been, that they've taken advantage of opportunity, they've had success in life, they've been blessed in more than one way. I think it's very important to have intentional humility in those situations. Like, how can I give back to a community? How can I help youth? How can I provide, like, for example, my wife and I volunteer with Habitat for Humanity. Nothing humbles you quicker when you're sitting in a house and maybe you had a rough day and you're like, man, today just stunk. But I worked in a guy in North Philly. We did a build site when I was back working for Holy Family. We did a build site with a guy that came in a tuxedo. Now, I didn't know what this guy's deal was. I had no idea. He was, I think, a Cuban guy. Nicest guy in the world, was up and down that ladder more than any of those fit college students that I work with, was doing everything he could. And he was wearing a tuxedo and dress shoes. And I'm like, and we sat down for lunch. We went down to the bodega down the corner. We got a bunch of hoagies for dirt cheap and walked back to the job site. It was a great day. So we're sitting down enjoying a sandwich. I said, what's the deal with this, man? And I said, what's the outfit? And he goes, well, this is all I have, and I have to do sweat equity. I said, he's like, we're building my house. I said, what do you mean? Well, this is the house that I'm going to be getting, and part of the Habitat responsibility is so you don't have to make a down payment. You do, I believe at the time it was 500 hours of sweat equity. So you don't have to pay to get into that property. I'm sitting there not knowing who this guy is, and I'm helping nail in walls and beams and different things to his house. And he is dressed in a tuxedo because that's all he had to wear with shoes and stuff. And that, just humbling yourself in that, because I haven't had the need for much. And that's because my father worked so hard. My parents sacrificed and provided every opportunity. I've been incredibly blessed, and I recognize that. And I think the thing to do, in addition to pushing that forward in your own kids, is recognizing those moments where you can humble yourself and give back. And I think that eliminates the idea of, at least the way it seems to be contextually now, is privilege. If you can give back to your community, provide ways for avenues for other people, scholarships, different things that you can provide to lift them up, you're now providing privilege. Is it really privilege, or are you opening up opportunity? And again, I ask that question: is privilege the right word to use?
That's such a good point, and that's such an amazing story that you threw out there. I was actually thinking about that myself, hearing you guys talk, and it is in a sense both words are on the same par. I think we use privilege because, and then we attach a race connotation to it because the anger, the history involved. But a lot of times it is opportunity. When you have opportunity, people think that you're privileged, but you have opportunity because those opportunities were placed in front of you, or somebody helped you to get to that opportunity, or you got that opportunity yourself, or family. So I do think that we're going to be thinking about the answer to this for a couple of days. That's what I really think. That was such a good point, Mike. That was a great point.
Yeah.
Let me ask.
Ruben, like he about to say something.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ruben.
No, I mean, that was a great question. I think part of what we got to understand is Mike is right as far as, like, in certain situations, people can use the fact that, okay, you know what, this person's privileged, so I'm not going to do the work. That's why they're ahead, because they got X, Y, Z. So I don't need to go ahead and work. And you know, if I would have had that, I would have done that too. I'm very aware that even though I'm pushing myself to extreme measures to give my kids an edge, to give them a leg up, that could also be to their, detriment, because now it's like they don't understand, the amount of work that I've put in to put them in a position to where they're at right now. So that's why, up until COVID, I used to always bring my kids to work with me. Part of that what was, they see me at work. They see me moving around. They see what I'm doing. So even if they're not doing anything, even if they're just being kids and I'm just yelling at them while I'm trying to do my work, them being in the environment where they seeing what's going on and they see me moving, they see me working, it's, without realizing, they're learning. Without realizing, they're soaking all that in. Because for me, a lot of what I know, I learned from my dad, but not necessarily just off conversations. We had a lot of conversations growing up, but it would just be like my car rides to school. His choices of listening to the news and being informed rather than letting me listen to music so I could be entertained. Because we're talking about an hour and a half ride to school every day, hour and a half ride back home. That's if we didn't have traffic. So now I'm stuck listening to the news, whether I like it or not. And I'm listening to him and I'm watching him and I'm hearing him debate with the radio. So now that instills the gift of gab in me without me even realizing it. So that I'm gaining my edge. I'm gaining that privilege, without even realizing that it's privilege. And and I'm saying this to you now, and it took years for me to realize, like, yo, everybody don't get that. A lot of kids don't get that. A lot of people growing up don't get that. So even something as simple as having your dad in your life, as a child, is a privilege. It's an edge. When you're looking at the statistics of the amount of people that don't even have that growing up. So having that advantage alone sets you up for a better chance for success than a lot of your counterparts. And that's whether you're white or black. Now you add the fact that you may be black to the situation, and what we know with the statistics when it comes to black men, and the fact that the incarceration rate or the poverty rate and the murder rate, we might be talking about and saying, okay, you know what, you don't privilege and it doesn't really exist and so forth and so on. But the reality of it is, like, when you throw some of these things in, it's there, and it can be, it's present in the most minute things, to where you may not even be perceiving it as privilege, but when you look back and you really put it under the microscope, you're like, yo, like that little grain of salt right there, that was the difference maker. That was the edge.
And I mean, you're right about that. But when I started and I gave a little jot down history in the United States and capitalism, I made it a point to mention that the ruling class made laws and policies that benefited their view on race, so they could push their agenda, push their propaganda. A lot of the laws that we have now that's on the books, a lot of decisions that's made financially in government towards schools, how they fund them. These are all things that were created in like the 50s and then the 60s and beyond. So those old laws, those old policies, those old decisions, they need to be addressed. I mean, when and I can't think of the guy's name. He was the FBI director. Oh, he was an asshole. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name. But when he was in charge, he actually drew up maps in major cities, and the maps were like, we're gonna devalue these neighborhoods, and these other neighborhoods are gonna be worth money. And for like 40 years, those maps ended up being the worst areas in those major cities. I think it was Hoover. Was it Hoover? Was Hoover in charge of the FBI?
Yes,
Yeah, I
sir.
think it was Hoover.
Edgar
So
Hoover.
I think that, yeah, that was during his time. Now let's shift topic again. I really don't want to talk about race because I really feel like people think there's so many races in these country in this country, and there are races. There's always going to be one group that feels like they're better than another. There's always going to be people that don't like you for whatever reason. But I think the biggest thing is the communication between different people with different ethnic backgrounds. Um, but I'm going to ask everyone this question. I'll start with you, Mike. Um, and I saw you were writing down. We'll give you a chance to come back with your questions because that's what I do. I like that. How do you feel? And we talked about this before. Actually, we've been kind of was in this situation before. But how do you feel when you're talking to someone and he's and I don't even like using the term white because, like you said, there's different classifications of what we determine as white. But how do you feel when you're talking to someone who's non a minority, and they say something as far as like a racial slur, and they say it to you because they feel like you're in the same boat, like you, they identify you with that. And before you answer, my question for Aaron and Ruben is, how do you feel when you're talking to a black person? And I'm gonna put it out there. I'm gonna say it because I say what I want. In a lot of situations, black people are the biggest racists in the world. And a lot of times they sit down there and say this person did this and this person did that. But there's a lot of black people that be like, Chinese people do this, Jewish people did this, white people this, white people that. So how do you deal with the situation when someone says something about, oh, that Jewish person, that Chinese person, that everybody's Puerto Rican, ain't no Dominicans or what? How do you deal with that situation when they say it to you and they of the same race as you? So we'll go to Mike and then we'll go to Aaron and then we'll go to Ruben. So we'll start with you, Mike.
To me, those statements are made lacking perspective. People just don't have enough experience with those other groups to make comments like that. And if it's a slur made in jest or in malice, ignorance can be easily subscribed to that. But I just think it's a lack of perspective. I believe that one of the best things that can happen is conversations like this, where you can break down walls of pre-existing understanding that people think, oh, well, I believe this, this, this. Well, have you ever gone and talked to that person? Have you ever broken down that wall to understand where they came from? I just learned tonight that the gentlemen in this conversation have had a very similar upbringing to me, where their fathers were hustlers and they imbued that into them, and they're trying to push that into their children. And that's a beautiful thing. And notice that we're all not the same color or same background or same area. We didn't have, there's a lot of difference there, but there's a lot of similarity that I think people don't have because they're not willing to have those conversations, because preconceived notions of these tribes that you belong to. One of the best things you can do is have a conversation with somebody and talk to somebody, understand their world experience. I'm a history major at heart. I went to school for history. I love learning about someone's story. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And oral storytelling is losing a lot of value and understanding where somebody comes from. I love sitting down. I have audio recordings of my grandparents telling me their stories growing up in Germantown, where they grew up with an Italian speaking homestead across the street from a German speaking homestead. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit and tell a funny story. So one of my family members was on the one side of the street, and there was a German family on the other side of the street. The member of my family went over and said in broken English, "Hey, have you seen my kid?" Because back then everybody's just running around the neighborhood. Everybody's running on porches, hanging out. Kids were being kids. Well, the woman that was across the street said in broken English, "Have you seen my Heine?" Well, Heine was short for Heinrich, but the Italian member of my family was like, "What? Have you seen my Heine? What are you talking about?" And goes in and tells everybody. And then somebody had to tell him, "Hey, no. She's not saying, 'Have you seen my back end?' Have you seen Heinrich? That's her son." And it's like funny little anecdotes like that, funny little stories like that show truly how it was. And as people in the neighborhood came together, and I guess that's also a disposition of growing up in Philly, is you grow up on top of people, so you have the opportunity to kind of see how everybody is. But I think going back to my original point, I think breaking down those walls when somebody says something like that, where are they coming from? What did they have an opportunity to engage with the people that they're saying that about? Do they understand their culture? Do they understand the depth of their history? Because whether it's a people that you're identifying or an individual person, there's a rich history there, and it tends to dissolve those senses of hatred or perhaps malice or frustration when you just go to somebody and have those conversations. And it all starts with dialogue. And I think the thing that's happening is no one's wanting to talk. Everybody's wanting to scream to be heard and not to listen and to understand and appreciate where somebody's coming from and start those conversations. And that makes it difficult. You're going to have ignorance no matter what. But I think if you start with a conversation, you approach it with a sound mind and a level head, you can learn a lot about somebody else. And it tends to break down those preconceived notions of this person's this or this person's that.
That's a good answer. I like that answer. And it's right. And you're right about communication is the key. A lot of our problems would be solved if we communicated, expressed ourselves better. Unfortunately, our society is more fast paced. People make decisions so fast. They go from I'm happy to I'm sad in like 2 seconds. They feel as though they shouldn't just have basic conversations with people that you pass in your everyday. And that's not everybody, but a large percentage of it. And so we're losing that oral communication, that oral storytelling.
It's all through a screen, man, and that depersonalizes the communication, because nobody would dare say what they're brave enough to say from behind a keyboard to somebody's face. It would either be a fight or it would be a dialogue. There's really those two extremes. It would get to the point where a physical altercation, or let me understand where you're coming from because you're really hot about this. Obviously, this is something you're passionate about. Why don't you
tell me? Or it might be both.
Yeah, or it could be both, and you just stand
fight then and dialogue.
But there's often respect found in recognizing that you disagree on something, but you can communicate like civil adults.
True. Aaron, you're up.
All right. What was the question again? No. No. I mean, so
I wrote it down. I can't repeat it.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, the question was, how do you feel when you're in the presence of somebody and they sit down and they're throwing race out there and talking as if it's okay? Like in a situation like, okay, your sons are mixed. So they may sit down there and have a conversation with you and say, oh, those Dominican or Puerto Rican people and this and that in that conversation? How would you handle that?
Like I have a good ability of ignoring people and the things that they say. I I'm not the type, not always to set people quote unquote straight. Um, if it's outright disrespect and it's another person that they're being disrespectful to, and the person isn't saying anything, and you can tell that it's an uneasy situation, at that point I would step in. Um, but as far as like, a lot of African Americans use the N word all the time, but then they get mad when somebody else say it, and it's like the word is the word, and it may have been used to oppress or whatever people back in the day, but words only have the meaning that you let it have towards you. If I know that the word means absolutely nothing to me, you can say all the words you want. You can say all the derogatory words, all the mean things you want to say, but if they have no power towards me, it doesn't matter what you say. So a lot of people, again, just have a different perspective of what other races are and how you should treat other races and how you should treat other people, men and women, gender, and things of that nature. And I just don't subscribe to it. I'm not going back to one of the things that you said, Mel. We're all human beings, and I know you said you are better than some people. I don't think that I'm better than another human being. It obviously depends on the situation, as in being an athlete or a fighter. Of course, I'm better than the person I'm going against because I want to win. And if I won, that means I'm better than you. But like outright, outright, like we're all human. Like I'm not better than any other human being. Like we all have the same flesh and blood. Of course, we all had different backgrounds and things of that nature. But again, like we're all human. We're all on this planet. So like I'm not better than anybody else. And I would never look to take an advantage over somebody by using demeaning words and things like that, especially of their towards their gender or their culture or anything like that to gain an advantage.
Okay, so
As long as they follow rule number one, right?
Yeah, as long as they just got
but
wear
to,
this
to
there.
what
I
you
just wear this shirt everywhere I go.
That's it. That's the solution right there.
I was
said,
glad you got it, Mike.
I figured it out. It took a little bit, but I figured it out.
now, to what you said, you ignore people a lot of times, and you have that ability to ignore people. But the words that people say always retain power. And some people does they don't have that ability to ignore what people say to them, so they respond, and of course that sometimes is going to lead to conflict. Um, you
Can I
also
throw
brought
something
up
out real quick, Mel?
yeah, go ahead.
Just something I wrote down, and I'm gonna get a little poetic here, but it, on the concept of that, because there's words throughout history that have had great meaning and have had great impact. I just wrote down, it just popped into my head, but worth is not a word, just for something to reflect on. Your worth is not tied to a word. So like Aaron had said, you give it what meaning you wish to. That's not saying the word doesn't have power or doesn't have influence, but as an individual, if you give it that power or give it that influence, that's you giving up your worth to a word.
True, true. I can't argue with that. Um, of course, some people are better at not giving up their worth, and others aren't. Um, Aaron's a stone cold killer when it comes to that. He'll ignore anybody if the situation is right. As far as I'm going to touch on the better than a person because you're some of your life experiences and the things that you go through. You know, is the totality of your life in a sense up until a point. And when I say I'm better than somebody, I don't think I'm better than somebody that's just walking down the street. I don't think I'm better than somebody that I see across the road. I think I'm better than somebody that may have murdered somebody, somebody that may be a detriment to society, in my opinion. So I do want to clear that up. As far as like opportunities, there are people that I think are better than me. Somebody that has no arms and they learn to play a classical piano. That's determination, that focus that I don't have. You know what I mean? So I don't want to just say I'm better than anybody. I'm just saying that confidence is there and I'm better than some people because some people are just like the reality of the world. You have good people, you have bad people. The biggest group in the world we have is the group that's in the middle. They don't want to tilt to one side or another. They just want to go through life. But I think I'm better than the bad people. That's
Good
just the
and bad
bottom line.
from middle perspective.
Now, with we have Ruben yet to answer the question. I didn't answer the question either, actually, but we have Ruben who has yet to answer the question. So give me a quick answer to the question, Ruben.
Oh, I gotta give a quick answer.
Yeah,
I got.
yeah, because
I'm on the
I'm
clock.
sure we're coming up on time for Aaron. Are you good for time, Aaron?
We right there. It's 9 right now, but go ahead.
All right, so I'm gonna speed it up for you, Aaron. So I one of the things I did for me, which I'm realizing this as I get older, is I told myself that everybody's after me. So like my drive is internal. Like I'm just looking for that. I'm looking for an edge in every situation. Like I love to compete. You know, I've been doing it for years. Like no, like my mom never had to push me to do good in school. I just wanted to be better. I was always self-driven, but I didn't realize that I was the only person. Like this wasn't a common thing until I got much older. So because my mindset was everybody's like this, so I'm pushing myself, looking for an edge. It allowed me to propel myself in a lot of different situations in life. Whereas like a lot of my counterparts, a lot of people that I may necessarily come in contact with, because they didn't have that same internal fire, they didn't necessarily, they weren't matching, my drive. They weren't matching, the output of effort that I was putting in. When the neighborhood that I live in, I'm the only person that look like me that lived there. Now, one of the things Mike had mentioned was, having a conversation. Everybody don't want to have that conversation. Like, story. I have a dog, German Shepherd, Siberian Husky. She's 4 years old now. She'll be 5 this year. When I moved in that neighborhood 4 years ago, like it's woods, it's all types of creeks. She loves it. I got her as a puppy from a farm. So that neighborhood basically remind her of the farm that I got her from 3 hours out of Philly. Looking like I look, I'm not chasing that dog in people's backyards. It's just not happening. So when I first moved there, the first 2.5, almost 3 years, every chance she gets, she's jumping fences, she's leaving, and when she leaves, I don't know the neighborhood, and I'm not chasing her in people's backyards because if I see somebody random in my backyard, I'm defending it. What are you doing here? So I'm not about to go chasing my dog in anybody's backyard. And I'm saying all this because it's like 2 years ago now, she goes and she allegedly ate somebody's duck. And I say allegedly because, like nobody's seen her doing it, but it was evidence of blood on her and the duck was missing. So supposedly she ate the duck. Now I had a conversation with that particular individual in my neighborhood. And I'm like, listen, I'm taking full responsibility. I apologize. Is there anything I could do? I can replace the duck, so forth and so on. At the surface, man to man, nah, don't worry about it. My kids are a little torn, but they'll get over it. It's okay, blah, blah, blah. Listen, I'm sorry. Nah, don't worry about it. It's okay. Dogs will be dogs. Cool. I still go out of my way trying to find ducks. Apparently, you can't just buy ducks. Ducks are seasonal animals, and you can't just buy ducks in the middle of the summertime. You gotta order them. They take about several months, and you can only do ducks during duck season. Call my wife. Hey, listen, the dog might have ate somebody's duck. I feel really bad. He said it was cool, but I'm trying to find more ducks. This and that. You can't buy ducks apparently. What do I get another duck to replace this duck? You can't replace the duck. Okay, no problem. Fast forward a few hours later, my dog is getting however many hundreds of comments on Facebook. Same individual, that was okay face to face. now I'm being blasted as a terrible neighbor and blah, 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 so forth and so on. All this to say, everyone don't want to have the, even though, you know, I have kids, he has kids, I feel bad. I know how my kids would feel if we had an animal that now is no longer there. And I didn't want, being a father, being a parent, I didn't want to have his kids feel the way they felt. So I'm trying my best to replace it. But even with me going through everything I'm going through, try to find a replacement for the duck, which eventually I ended up not replacing because I couldn't. I'm still getting the backlash, you know, online because we can't have the conversation face to face. So if I'm in a situation where you know, I hear somebody that look like me try to do or say something that I may feel that they wouldn't necessarily say if I didn't look like me, my 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna be I'm usually the guy that's like, yeah, I don't know about that, because I like to be the contrarian, but especially in those situations, I'm definitely gonna be the person where it's like, yeah, you know what, even if I typically would agree with you, I'm just gonna go against you just for the sake of going against you, because I don't know, I like doing stuff like that to people. It brings me joy. So
all right, we're coming up against the time for Aaron, and usually this is the part of the show where we go, who's to blame for the current situation. We're not going to go who's to blame for the current situation. Um, I'm just going to ask all you guys: do you agree with the situation be better served if everybody just talked? You know what I mean? Is that the consensus in this room right now, or in these rooms right now, that if we communicated, everything would be better?
I think yes, and I say yes, and I also say if it was a little bit easier to find ducks, it would make the world a way better place.
He said maybe it wasn't my dog, but the dog had duck blood on his chin.
He was wearing a duck bib, but it wasn't a dog.
But it wasn't a duck.
He might have walked into a bloody. You know what? And all they do have coyotes. Not coyotes. They have foxes in my neighborhood. They got all types of they got all types of wild animals out there. So it could have been a fox. There's a family of fox that's always around there. Them ducks.
Well, your dog's been jumping through backyards, so he could have been plotting on that duck for a long time now.
I mean, I don't know. Who knows? It's a bird.
But listen, I want to thank Big Mike for joining us this week. I appreciate you coming in. I know it was a hard topic to talk about. I appreciate the time that you came in and talked about it, and I appreciate the answers that you gave. I want to thank once again Aaron the Hitman, Ruben the Monarch. I'm Big Mel, and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us. Everybody, in the future, if you look at our YouTube channel and you like the show, hit the like button, subscribe. We'll be on podcast form very soon. I'll keep you notified. And like always, we're trying to build a foundation to grow in society. So if you have a question, if you have a concern, if you have something that you need to say, fill in the comments. We'll get back to you. We'll bring you on. You know, we want to make the world a better place, and we're willing to do it at one person at a time. So, gentlemen, thank you for coming. Everybody viewing, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. Combustible Elements. We'll talk.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Appreciate y'all.